I was a ghost in my own house for 730 days. That's 2 years. It sounds like a statistic until you live through the minutes. It's 1,300 minutes of standing in a kitchen, smelling the coffee you just brewed, and realizing that the woman sitting 3 feet away from you doesn't just ignore you. She literally does not see you. I would watch Sarah. I'd watch the way her eyes tracked the steam rising from her mug, the way she checked the time on her phone, the way she adjusted the collar of her blouse. Her gaze would sweep across the room, passing over the toaster, the fruit bowl, the microwave, and then me. There was no hitch in her breathing, no flicker of recognition. To her, I had the same emotional value as the drywall or the baseboards. I was a structural necessity that required zero interaction. Most guys think the end of a marriage happens with a bang. They expect the Hollywood version, the screaming match in the driveway, the shattered plates, the dramatic, "I'm leaving you" speech. They think there will be a clear villain and a clear moment of impact. But for me, the end didn't come with fire. It came with a deafening, suffocating silence that settled over our lives like a layer of fine dust. It was a slow-motion car crash that lasted 24 months, and the impact started the very second our son, Mark, turned 6. I remember Mark's 6th birthday party with a clarity that hurts. The house was full of the chaotic energy of children, the smell of cheap sugar and expensive pizza. I was there doing what good dads do. I built the Lego sets. I refilled the juice boxes. I took out the overflowing bags of trash. I was a hero to the kids, but to Sarah, I was just a logistics manager. When the last guest left and Mark was tucked into bed, dreaming of plastic dinosaurs, I walked into the kitchen. I expected that "we did it" look. You know the one. The tired, shared smile between parents who survived another milestone. I reached out to touch her shoulder, to offer a moment of connection. She flinched, not out of fear, but out of annoyance. It was the same way you'd flinch if a fly landed on your arm while you were trying to read. "I'm exhausted, Dave. Just don't," she said. She didn't even look up from the counter she was wiping down. In that moment, the shift was complete. The parental unit had successfully launched the child into mid-childhood. The biological mission was over, and in Sarah's mind, my secondary role as a partner had been deleted to save memory space. I had been demoted from a husband to an appliance. We're going to talk about the exact moment a man stops being a man and starts being an appliance. Think about your dishwasher. You don't love it. You don't take it out to dinner. You don't ask it how its day was or wonder what it's dreaming about. You just expect it to clean the plates. If it works, you ignore it. If it breaks, you're annoyed because now you have to do the work. That was me. I was the mortgage payer 3000. I was the trash extractor deluxe. I was the he who fixes the Wi-Fi. As long as the money hit the account and the lawn was mowed, I was functioning within normal parameters. But the moment I reached out for affection, the moment I asked for a spark of the woman I'd married 10 years ago, I was malfunctioning. I was being needy. I was an appliance that was making a weird noise, and she just wanted me to be quiet so she could focus on her real life. The natural instinct for a man in this position is to try harder. It's the biggest mistake we make. I spent a year thinking that if I just did more, she'd see me. I bought the flowers. I booked the weekend getaways she'd eventually cancel. I did the dishes before she could even ask. I became the perfect, subservient, nice guy husband. And all it did was make me more invisible. Because you don't reward a toaster for toasting bread. You just expect it to do it. By trying harder to fix a broken marriage through service, I was actually confirming her bias. That my only value was what I could provide, not who I was. I was suffocating, watching my masculinity slowly drain out of me, replaced by a desperate, pathetic hope for a crumb of attention. I'm going to share something with you today that most men are too ashamed to admit. I'm going to share how I accidentally stumbled onto the one psychological trigger that brought my wife back to life. It wasn't a romantic gesture. It wasn't a talk. It was something much darker and much more effective. But as I stand here today, telling you this, I have to realize the most painful truth of all. I might have waited too long to pull that trigger. By the time the light came back on in her eyes, the man she was looking for had already died inside. The shift didn't happen with a bang. It wasn't a sudden frost that killed the garden overnight. It was a slow, agonizing drop in temperature, 1 degree at a time, until I woke up and realized I was living in a permafrost. When Mark turned 6, something shifted in Sarah's DNA. It was as if her capacity for love had a finite volume, and she decided to pour every single drop of it into our son. I watched it happen from the sidelines. I'd come home from a 10-hour shift, my back aching and my mind frayed from the corporate grind, and I'd walk through that front door hoping for a welcome home. Instead, I'd see her on the floor with Mark. Her face would be radiant, her laughter genuine, the kind of laughter that used to be reserved for my jokes. But the moment she looked up and saw me, the light didn't just dim, it extinguished. Her face would settle into a mask of polite tolerance. "Oh, you're home," she'd say, her voice flat. "There's mail on the counter. We need more milk. And Mark has a soccer game on Saturday, so don't schedule anything." Just like that, I was briefed. I wasn't a partner returning to his sanctuary. I was a subordinate receiving his task list for the evening. I became the guy who paid the mortgage, the guy who took out the trash, and the guy who existed purely to facilitate her life with our son. I was the silent engine under the hood of a car she loved to drive, but she never once thought to check the oil or thank the machine for the miles. We hadn't touched in months, and I don't just mean sex, though that was a distant, blurry memory at this point. I mean contact. No hand-holding on the couch. No brief brush of the shoulder in the hallway. No good morning kiss that lasted more than a transactional peck. I lived for those moments where I'd try to bridge the gap. I'd wait until Mark was asleep and the house was quiet. I'd sit next to her on the sofa while she scrolled through her phone, and I'd reach out to rub her neck. I could feel her entire body go rigid. It was the posture of a person being touched by a stranger on a crowded bus, polite but desperate for the contact to end. "I'm just so tired, Dave," she'd say, pulling away. That phrase, "I'm just tired," became the anthem of my life. It's a phrase that acts as a legal loophole for emotional abandonment. How can you be mad at someone for being tired? But after the 100th time you realize "I'm tired" doesn't mean she needs sleep. It means I have nothing left for you. Every time I tried to initiate a date night, or even just a conversation that didn't revolve around school schedules or home repairs, I got the look. It's a specific look of weary disappointment, as if my desire for her was an inconvenient chore she didn't have the energy to complete. It makes a man feel about 2 inches tall. You start to feel like a predator for wanting to love your own wife. You start to feel like a nuisance in the house you pay for. I spent an entire year playing the role of the good husband, to a pathological degree. I thought I could earn my way back into her heart. I thought marriage was a vending machine. If I put in enough nice guy tokens, more chores, more flowers, more listening, more patience, eventually affection would drop out. I became a servant. I'd spend my Saturdays doing deep cleans of the garage. I'd bring her favorite coffee to her bedside. I'd listen to her vent about her friends for hours, nodding along, suppressing my own needs to make room for hers. I bought the jewelry. I wrote the cards. I tried to be there for her in every way the modern world tells a man he should. But here is the brutal truth that no one tells you. You cannot negotiate desire. The more I did for her, the less she respected me. By becoming her servant, I had signaled to her that I had no value of my own. I was suffocating in my own home, waiting for a crumb of affection that never came. I was 37 years old, in the prime of my life, and I felt like a ghost haunting my own hallways. I was watching my masculinity slowly drain out of a bathtub, and I was the one who had pulled the plug. The most painful part wasn't the lack of sex. It was the loss of my best friend. Sarah and I used to talk until 3 a.m. about our dreams, our fears, and the ridiculous things we saw during the day. Now, we were just two people sharing a lease and a child. I'd look at her across the dinner table and realize I didn't know who she was anymore, and she certainly didn't care to know me. We were roommates who happened to have a shared bank account. I felt trapped. I felt like my life was already over, and I was just waiting for the clock to run out. I'd go to the bathroom, lock the door, and just stare at myself in the mirror. I'd look at the lines around my eyes and wonder, is this it? Is this the next 40 years? Working a job I tolerate to pay for a house where I'm not wanted? For a woman who looks through me like I'm made of glass? The silence was heavy. It was a physical weight on my chest every time I walked through the door. I was a man who had done everything right, yet I had never felt more wrong. I was waiting for a sign, a spark, anything to tell me that I still mattered. But the house stayed cold. The bed stayed empty. And the good husband was slowly dying inside, replaced by something much colder, much harder, and much more dangerous. It didn't happen with a shout. There was no grand cinematic monologue where I stood on a table and demanded respect. It was much quieter than that. It happened on a Tuesday night, around 11:15 p.m. I was sitting on the edge of the bed, waiting for Sarah to finish her nightly 20-minute skincare routine, a routine she performed with more devotion and care than she had shown our marriage in years. I realized I was holding my breath, waiting for her to come out so I could offer a forced smile, ask if she needed anything, and hope for a flicker of warmth. And in that silence, something inside me simply snapped. It wasn't a break. It was a clicking into place, a realization that I had spent 700 days auditioning for a role in a play she had already canceled. I looked at my reflection in the darkened window. I saw a man who had become a shadow of himself, a man who was asking for permission to occupy the space he paid for. And in that moment, I decided, if she wants me to be invisible, then I will be gone, but not in the way she expects. The next morning, I didn't wake up to serve. I woke up to build. I was at the gym by 5:30 a.m. For a year, I had used being a good dad and helping with the morning routine as an excuse for my own physical decline. No more. I walked into that gym and felt the cold iron of the weights in my hands. It was the first thing I had felt in months that didn't feel like a compromise. Every rep was a middle finger to the appliance I had become. I wasn't just lifting weights. I was lifting the weight of her indifference off my chest. Within weeks, my posture changed. When you stop looking at the floor, waiting for someone to notice you, your chin naturally lifts. My shoulders squared. The dad bod I had cultivated as a sign of my domestication began to melt away, revealing the frame of the man I used to be, the man Sarah had actually fallen in love with before I became convenient. I stopped asking, "Is it okay if I go to the gym?" I just went. I stopped asking, "Do you need anything from the store?" I just assumed she was an adult capable of handling her own errands. I stopped being the backup plan for her boredom. Then came the Thursdays. For years, I had turned down every invitation from my friends. "I can't. Sarah's tired." Or, "I should probably stay home and help with Mark." I had isolated myself in a prison of my own making, thinking my presence was a gift she valued. It wasn't. It was just an expected utility. That first Thursday, when I told her I was going out for drinks with the guys and wouldn't be back until late, she didn't even look up from her iPad. "Fine," she said, her voice dripping with the usual apathy. But as the weeks went on, the fine started to sound different. Because when I came home at midnight, smelling of wood smoke and expensive bourbon, laughing at a joke one of the guys had told, I didn't go to her for validation. I didn't crawl into bed and apologize for being late. I went to the guest room or fell asleep on my side of the bed without saying a word. I stopped being there to tuck her in. I stopped being the nightly emotional pillow she used to transition into sleep. I became a man with his own schedule, his own tribe, and his own life. The most jarring part of this transformation wasn't how I felt. It was how the world reacted. When you spend 2 years being treated like a piece of furniture, you start to believe you are one. But as I started dressing better, swapping the oversized hoodies for fitted shirts, investing in a real haircut, wearing a fragrance that didn't come from a grocery store aisle, the world started to talk back. I started noticing other women, not in a predatory way, and I wasn't looking to cheat. But I noticed the way the barista at the coffee shop lingered when she handed me my drink. I noticed the way women in the office actually made eye contact and held it. I noticed that I was being seen. It was a dizzying realization. I wasn't invisible. I was only invisible to her. This realization is the ultimate psychological trigger. When a man realizes he has options, not just romantic options, but the option to be happy elsewhere, his energy changes. I stopped carrying the scent of the seeker. I was no longer the hungry dog begging for a scrap under the table. I was the man at the table, and I was already full. The energy in our home didn't just change, it inverted. Silence used to be my enemy. I used to try to fill it with nervous chatter about the weather or the bills, just to hear her voice. Now, silence was my ally. I used it as a shield. I was too busy living my own life to notice she was even in the room. I'd walk past her in the hallway while listening to a podcast, focused on my own thoughts, my own goals. For the first time in a decade, I wasn't the one leaning in. I was the one pulling away. I wasn't the one asking for attention. I was the one who was too occupied to give it. I could feel her watching me. I'd be in the kitchen, meal prepping for the week, and I'd feel her gaze on the back of my neck. It wasn't the look of annoyance anymore. It was a look of profound confusion. She had spent 2 years expecting me to be exactly where she left me, in the corner, waiting to be used. Now, the corner was empty. The appliance had grown legs and walked out the door, and as I looked in the mirror that Friday morning, seeing a man I finally recognized, I realized that the ghost was gone. Something else had taken its place, something she wasn't prepared for. It happened faster than I expected, and it happened with a visceral intensity that was almost jarring. For 2 years, I had been a ghost, a background character in the story of her life. But as soon as I stopped auditioning for her attention, the light switch in her brain flipped. It was a cold, calculated realization on her part. The man who was always there, the man who was predictable and safe and invisible, had suddenly become a variable. He had become a man that other people might actually want. The first time I saw the jealousy take root was a Friday night. I hadn't asked her for a date. I had simply told her I was going out to a local spot to meet a former colleague. I dressed with a level of intent I hadn't felt in years. A tailored jacket, a crisp shirt, and the confidence that comes from a month of heavy lifting and self-respect. When I walked through the living room, she actually paused her show and looked at me. Not through me, at me. Her eyes traveled from my shoes up to my face, and for the first time in 700 days, I saw a flicker of doubt in her expression. It was the look of someone realizing they had left a valuable possession out on the sidewalk and were suddenly wondering if someone else had picked it up. Later that night, she did something she hadn't done in years. She showed up. She arrived at the bar with a couple of her friends, claiming they just happened to be in the neighborhood. But I saw the way her eyes scanned the room until they landed on me. I was standing near the corner, engaged in a genuine conversation with a woman I'd just met. We were laughing, and for a moment, I wasn't the husband appliance. I was just a man enjoying a moment. I saw Sarah's face go pale from across the room. The moment she saw another woman's hand briefly touch my forearm as she laughed at my joke, Sarah moved. She didn't walk. she marched. She stepped into my space, grabbed my arm with a grip that was almost painful, and introduced herself with a territorial edge that was unmistakable. It wasn't just a protective gesture. It was the look of someone who realized they were about to lose something they'd taken for granted for far too long. When we got home, the silence was gone, replaced by a frantic, desperate energy. Suddenly, Sarah was the one asking the questions. She wanted to know who that woman was, what we talked about, and where I had been going on my Thursday nights. The indifference had been scorched away by the heat of competition. But it didn't stop at questions. Within 48 hours, the "I'm just tired" version of my wife had vanished. She was buying new lingerie, leaving it on the bed where she knew I'd see it. She was wearing the perfume I used to tell her I loved back when we were still us. She was trying to reclaim her territory, attempting to plant her flag back on a heart she had spent 2 years ignoring. She became the affectionate, engaged wife I'd been praying for during those long, lonely months of the slow freeze. She wanted the intimacy back, the late-night talks that lasted until the sun came up, and the deep, soulful connection we had when we first met. She was doing everything in her power to make sure I knew she was still mine, and that I was still hers. She was leaning into me at dinner, brushing her hand against mine while we watched TV, and looking at me with a hunger that I hadn't seen since our honeymoon. It was the exact scenario I had hallucinated about during my darkest moments of isolation. I had spent 700 days literally starving for this specific version of her, but as I sat there, feeling her hand on my arm and listening to her tell me how much she appreciated everything I did for the family, I realized something terrifying. The way she was looking at me now felt different than it did before the silence started. Before, her love felt like a gift, something given freely because of who I was. Now it felt like a reaction. It felt like a frantic attempt to maintain control of a resource that was slipping away. I looked at her, and instead of feeling the rush of relief I expected, I felt a strange, cold clarity. I was watching her do maintenance on our relationship because the appliance had suddenly become too expensive to replace. The irony was suffocating. I finally had the woman I wanted, but I had to become a stranger to her to get her to see me. The connection she was trying so hard to forge felt hollow because it was born out of fear, not out of genuine appreciation for the man who had stood by her through the silence. She was fighting for me now, yes, but she wasn't fighting for Dave. She was fighting for the status quo. She was fighting because her ego couldn't handle the idea of me being happy without her. I watched her laugh at my stories and try to initiate physical closeness, and all I could think about was how easy it had been for her to ignore me when she thought I had nowhere else to go. The fire was back in her eyes, but as I looked into them, I didn't see a partner. I saw someone who only realized the value of the water once the well had already started to run dry. The candle flickers between us, casting long, dancing shadows across the table of this restaurant. The kind of place we used to save for anniversaries, but which now feels like a stage for a play I'm no longer sure I want to act in. Sarah is sitting across from me, looking more radiant than she has in years. She's wearing that emerald silk dress, the one she knows makes my heart skip a beat, the one she hadn't touched since before the silence began. She's leaned in so close I can smell the familiar notes of her perfume, a scent that used to be my sanctuary, but now feels like a calculated distraction. Her hand is resting firmly on mine, her thumb tracing small, anxious circles over my knuckles, and she's talking about us. She's telling me how much she's missed what we had, how she finally realizes how far apart we've drifted, and how she's ready to do the work to make things right. Her voice is soft, laced with a vulnerability that would have brought me to my knees just 6 months ago. She's looking at me with wide, searching eyes, waiting for me to squeeze her hand back, waiting for me to say the words that will bridge the canyon between us. She's waiting for me to tell her that everything is okay, that the slow freeze is over, and that we are back to being the perfect couple everyone else thinks we are. She thinks the fire is back because she finally decided to show up with a match, and she's looking for that old spark in my eyes, the one that used to ignite every single time she walked into a room. But as I sit there, the weight of the last 730 days feels heavier than the air in the room. The irony of this moment is almost suffocating. She finally sees me. She's looking at me with a focus so intense it's almost clinical. But all I see when I look back is a woman who only started caring once she realized I didn't need her care to survive. I see a woman whose affection isn't a gift, but a reaction to the fear of loss. I realize that for 2 years, I was dying for a crumb of this attention, and she withheld it because she thought I was a permanent fixture, as reliable and unremarkable as the floor beneath her feet. Now that I've shown her I have a life of my own, now that I've stopped being the appliance and started being a man with options, she's frantically trying to buy back my devotion with the very things she once weaponized through her absence. She's waiting for me to kiss her, to tell her I love her more than anything, and to promise that we can go back to the way things were before the silence started. She wants to hit a reset button and pretend the last 2 years were just a bad dream, a temporary glitch in our programming. She wants the good husband back, the one who was grateful for any small sign of her favor. But the man sitting across from her tonight isn't that guy anymore. That guy died somewhere between the gym sessions and the lonely Thursday nights at the bar. The man sitting here now has learned the most dangerous lesson a husband can learn, that he can be perfectly fine, even happy, without the validation of the woman he loves. The most terrifying realization of all hits me as the waiter sets our plates down and the silence between us stretches thin. I'm looking at her exactly the way she used to look at me. I feel a cold, detached sense of observation where there used to be a burning, desperate heat. I see her beauty. I hear her words. I feel the warmth of her skin on mine. But it doesn't reach the core of me. The light she's trying so hard to project is hitting a wall of glass. I realized that for 2 years, she trained me to live in the dark. She taught me how to find my own warmth, how to navigate the world without her guidance, and how to build a version of myself that didn't require her approval. And now that she's finally ready to turn the light back on, I find that my eyes have adjusted to the shadows. I look at her hand on mine, and for the first time, I don't feel the urge to hold on. I feel the urge to let go, not out of anger, not out of a desire for revenge, but out of a profound, hollow exhaustion. She thinks she's winning me back, but she doesn't realize she's fighting for a version of me that no longer exists. She's trying to reclaim a territory that has already been decolonized. As she leans in for a kiss, her eyes pleading for a sign that we're okay, I realize that the silence didn't just break our marriage, it changed the very chemistry of my soul. I look at the woman I once would have died for, and I realize the light isn't just off. The bulb is shattered. And as I prepare to speak, I know that the words coming out won't be the ones she's been waiting to hear.